to Mailman Grand Rounds. Thank you for hanging out here. It sounds like traffic was not so fun and exciting this morning for people, so glad that you are here. I promise you this morning that it's not a bait and switch. We have two speakers this morning, so you're stuck with me for part of the time, and I'll tell you a little bit of what we do here. And then we also have Jonathan Comer coming from FIU. He's really one of the leading psychologists in the country in terms of telehealth behavioral interventions for children, for anxiety disorders, as well as kids with disruptive behavior disorders. So we're really excited to have him coming here too to chat. So he'll be here in a little bit. But just so, let me just ask, just to get started, how many folks are actually aware of what parent-child interaction therapy is? They have some contacts. All right, so some people not. So I'll give you just a real quick, brief overview of what it is. So one of the most common referrals that we have in outpatient therapy clinic is disruptive behavior disorders. And the most common psychosocial intervention that should be prescribed for that is behavioral parent training. And traditionally, that had been done in kind of a didactic type approach, where parents would just kind of go see a therapist. Therapists would give them information about things that they wanted them to try out with their kids. And then the parents would go do that for a week and then come back. And they would do that in an individual format. They would do that in a group parenting class format. PCIT is a little bit different, where it uses a live coaching model of treatment, where we actually have the parent bring in their child into treatment. And we have that here at the Mailman Center. We serve between the Mailman Center and Little Havana and the Gables campus. We serve about 40 to 45 families a week, so we have pretty decent capacity. And it's actually done where we have the parent and the child playing together in one room, where the parent is wearing like an earphone, and then we have a one-way mirror and a video feed from another room where the therapist is actually coaching. The therapist is actually coaching the parent on how to interact with the child. So the first phase of treatment is really focusing on relationship enhancement skills, so really catching the kid being good, teaching the parent positive attention skills. So when your kid's doing good things, say nice things to your kids. And then we teach them in the second phase of treatment, effective discipline strategies. So a lot of these parents have inconsistent discipline strategies, so we actually coach them in session on how to actually use it, and then they have to go home and practice it. It works really well for kids 2 to 7. And we've seen that it's worked with kids with developmental disabilities. We're seeing emerging evidence that it's working with kids with high functioning autism. And we're seeing it beginning to be applied in different ways. So today, first you'll hear from me just kind of talking about one of the things that we've run into is evidence-based intervention. There's an accessibility issue. So we wanted to look at ways that we could increase access either to evidence-based intervention or increase the access of this intervention to new populations that perhaps weren't receiving it in the first place. So just to give some brief acknowledgement, so we're able to, the best part is one of the, oftentimes an access issue or a barrier to treatment is the affordability of treatments. We know a lot of times some of the top psychologists in Miami-Dade County, they only accept cash for services. And due to generous funding from the Children's Trust, we're actually able to provide those services for free for families, which is really exciting. Pocket PCIT was funded by the Verizon Foundation, and that's another free resource that we have available for families. And then some of the partnerships I'm going to be talking about is Healthy Steps for Young Children, which is a program that we have at the 3 pediatric practices here. So we have them at PAC, ACC, and down at Kendall at U Health Pediatrics South, where they're developmental specialists. And they are working with parents when they come in to see their pediatrician. Our staff actually goes in there too and provides parenting education, developmental screening, social emotional screening. We do autism screening, postpartum depression screening. We're actually doing home visits and coaching them on positive parent-child interactions there as well. And then our Little Havana work is working with a group called Connect Familias. They are a service partnership within Little Havana, where they connect children and families to a lot of different services through a care coordination model. Within that model, they use natural helpers, so lay people that are kind of trusted members of the community that are there to kind of provide natural support and assistance to the members of the community that are in need. In some cases, it's people that have actually received services from Connect Familias, and then they've been successful in getting to maybe getting independence or getting a job, or they dealt with behavioral health issues in their child, and they're doing really well. So they've been through the experience, and sometimes they hire those individuals to be natural helpers for them, and they provide them with some specialized training. So when we talk about our partnerships, that's what we'll be talking about. So when we talk about connecting families to services, I'm first going to talk about Pocket PCIT, which I like it a lot. I get really nerdy about it. And then I'll talk about how we've utilized natural helpers to recruit and engage families within Little Havana to help them access PCIT. And then we'll talk about something that we just started. Was it September or October was our first one that we did with primary care PCIT. So it's something that's relatively new that we're now doing. And so some of you may know Michelle Berkovitz. She's at Early Steps, and she actually was the person that developed this program as a part of her dissertation, which is a brief group parenting program using the PCIT principles. So when we were thinking about Pocket PCIT, one of the issues, so we have really effective treatment, but one of the issues with that is there's still high attrition rates when it comes to parent training. Depending on the study and the community where behavioral parent training is happening, is the attrition rates, meaning that people are dropping out of treatment for successfully meeting the requirements for graduation, can range anywhere from 25 to 70%. So even if we get people to start services, they may not be benefiting from that. And then the other thing that we often deal with, okay, so even if we practice skills in home, or practice the skills during the session, which there's been a meta-analysis that has actually established that if parents actively get to practice skills in the session with their kids, it increases the effect size of treatment outcomes. Is sometimes we worry about how effectively they're actually practicing these things at home. Also, we all know that we all learn in different ways. We know that didactic approach, which is what I'm doing right now, is one of the least efficient ways of learning new information. So you will retain maybe 20% of what I'm saying, maybe less, because it's very early and it's Friday. So we wanted to make sure that they had a resource that could help people that learn different ways. So for some people, having somebody coaching you in the ear what to do might feel really overwhelming, and they may not be getting it at the level they want. So we wanted to give them video resources that maybe provide information, that show what the skills actually look like. And I'll show you a demonstration of that in a little bit. To have text available, to have things that they can interact with, things that are accessible to them at all times, so that we can make sure that they have that information. We also know that accessibility of evidence-based interventions is an issue, and sometimes people don't know where to look. So even within Pocket PCIT, we built a link so it goes to the PCIT International website, where it can link them to certified providers, not only in this country, but in other countries as well. The other thing is, so how many of you, when you go to the doctor's office, they give you like some type of paper handout? Okay, how many of you treasure those paper handouts and you keep them and you utilize them? Right, so what we do this too in parent training, like, hey, here's a handout for how to set up a behavior chart. Here's a handout for how to practice emotion regulation with your child. But like when their kid's having a meltdown at the store, they don't have that resource with them. So we wanted to make sure they had a resource that was with them at all times. So the proposed solution that we thought about doing, and I'll be presenting this through kind of the frame of our interprofessional collaboratives, is kind of one of the things that our interprofessional collaborative promoting behavioral health is really beginning to develop interprofessional behavioral health systems of care. Is that we wanted that mobile resource that families could access at all times when they needed it the most. Within this particular project, we actually partnered with telehealth and a graphic designer, because I'm a psychologist, and before I did this stuff, I didn't know anything about video editing, I didn't know anything about developing an iBook or any of that stuff, so we needed to bring experts to the table to help us actually create this resource for folks. And then our implementation plan was to develop and publish this iBook that families could use during PCIT, or that they could use to learn about PCIT, and then if they felt like it might be something that might be worth their while, they would be able to link to and get information on where they can access treatment. We're currently in the process of conducting a randomized trial. So far, our preliminary data, sometimes when we add things, they actually hurt versus help. So at least with our preliminary data, we can say we're not hurting anything, which is a good thing. And while we had a small sample size, we were trending in that the people that got pocket PCIT were trending towards actually completing treatment in fewer sessions by having this additional resource. So we have 74 families enrolled currently. They're randomized to either get pocket PCIT, where we give them an iPad with all of the information, or they just kind of get standard treatment. So we're seeing if it has any additive benefits. And I would say that we'll have our final sample for that collected probably by the end of May. So that will be exciting. We'll have that data, or it'll be really disappointing. We'll find out together. All right. So we talked about what it is. It provides additional resources for caregivers to learn the skills. So text, video, information, interactive widgets. For the specific skills that we want them using, the pride skills, it shows them, describes what it is. It shows what it is. It gives them interactive widgets to try it out and learn about it. And then even resources of how they can personalize it to their given situation. And also, we have this very strict protocol in some respects where we have to cover a lot of stuff in an hour. And one of the things we're worried about is attrition rates. So we wanted to have some treatment engagement stuff in there. So there's a lot of stuff built in the front of the iBook of deciding whether or not treatment is important for you, how it can help. Having parents that actually graduated from treatment explaining how it's changed their lives. Because it's one thing if I say this is going to help, but it's another thing if a parent says, hey, I went through this, this is amazing. Having parents say, here's how you can get the most out of it while you're in treatment. Here's what the most difficult thing was for me, and this is how we dealt with this challenge. We wanted to make sure that it was at a reading level. We would have loved to get it to a 6th grade reading level, but we got it down to a 7th grade reading level, and we wanted to make sure that it was free because I don't care about money, apparently, and I just want to make sure that, good information for parents we wanted out there in the community. All right, so here's my son and my wife hiding in the background of the desktop, but I'm just going to walk you through just kind of a brief overview of what it actually is and kind of some of the different resources. So it has expert testimonies kind of explaining when you might need treatment, explaining what the different skills are, what you can expect during the first phase of treatment. It has voiceover presentations, so kind of explaining the theory behind coercive parent-child interactions. So how do these disruptive behaviors start in the first place? How is the parent contributing to that? How is the child contributing to that? As I said, we have these parent testimonies. So these are families that actually went through the intervention that were willing to kind of share their story. So deciding whether they needed additional help. And then we also had interactive widgets. So, we wanted them to be able to praise their child in a variety of ways. We had a label praise mixer where you could spin the wheel and create different ways of praising. There are 2 turntables and a microphone for you Beck fans out there. So we had those built in there too. Praising positive opposites. So if the parent has a problem behavior, defining the opposite behavior and how you can praise it, giving them an opportunity to kind of quiz themselves on kind of a specific skill and having that opportunity to do that. And then actually having special time activities where the kid could actually draw and the parent could practice describing what the child's doing, praising the child for what it is that they're doing. And then the other thing is kind of combining of, okay, if you hear somebody say the skill, do I know exactly what it actually is? So we would actually, and yes, we didn't have paid actors, so we just used our own kids, is whenever we said a particular skill, that skill would pop up on the screen. So the parent could begin to pair, oh, well, what it sounds like this, that's a behavior description. That's a label praise. And what this special time is, that's the homework that they're doing every day. But we also want them to be using it outside of 5 minutes a day. So we want them, so if you're playing video games with your kid, how can you use the skills during that time? If you're doing homework with your child, how can you use the skills during that time? If you're at the dinner table, how can you use the skills during that time? Sometimes parents didn't know which toys to use, so we just kind of created hyperlinks so that they can know what toys and made it kind of ease of access. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of what's in there. So far, and again, we're not broadly advertising this because we don't want to broadly advertise something before we know that it is helpful in any meaningful way, but it is available in the iBook store. And at this point, we're just kind of looking for feedback of people that would be using it from a that aren't in PCIT, but just getting feedback from people that like, how useful is this in terms of just as a parenting resource. So it does direct families to the PCIT website, where you can see all of the certified providers that we have in the country. Obviously, we're missing the middle of the country quite a bit. We need to work there in terms of dissemination. And then just in terms of downloads, we're hitting not only the United States, but some other countries as well. I don't know what they're doing with it in Japan, but hey, that's cool. It's there. So if you want to try it out, it's something that you can do on your iBooks. It is only available on Apple products, but it's something that you can download in the iBooks app on your iPhone, iPad, or Mac, or you can just Google Pocket PCIT. That's another easy way to get to it. So that's Pocket PCIT. So that's one of the three things. Yes, Jeff?
You want to invite people to come and sit down.
Yeah, please come grab a seat wherever there is one. So that was kind of the tech way of trying to increase access, increasing the resources related to parent-child interaction therapy. Then this is kind of more of like the front lines effort. So one of the things that we know is that Hispanic children are at increased risk for conduct disorders. And we actually know as a population, they're actually less likely to access behavioral health services for that particular issue. And we had some meetings with Connect Familias in Little Havana and just kind of trying to figure out ways that we could partner with them. And they were saying how like behavior concerns was a big issue to them. And so with all the data that we collect, we could actually do a zip code analysis of like, well, how many people were we actually serving from Little Havana? Then it turned out barely anybody from Little Havana, and they're not too many blocks away from here. So we thought that was a huge issue that we wanted to address. So knowing that they have a care coordination system and that they have natural helpers there, and we know based on research that families are actually interested in receiving support from natural helpers as it relates to parenting, that this might be a good fit of a model that we could try out. Now we also know that sometimes when you add things onto PCIT like traditional wraparound services, where it's care coordination about everything, that can actually worsen treatment outcomes. Because instead of having one primary focus, you're telling a family, hey, focus on 20 different things, and kind of that might diffuse the effectiveness of each of those things. So we wanted to make sure that when we did this, we were very targeted in our approach of training the natural helpers. But the natural helpers, while they felt comfortable supporting parents, they felt comfortable linking them to kind of normal, parenting classes. They didn't feel as comfortable talking to parents about, the kids that had disruptive behaviors, the kids that are getting kicked out of daycare, that are getting suspended from school, that the parents, or there might be potential like physical punishment or even child maltreatment going on at the home. So our proposed solution was well, okay, so we've had this outreach, but we're not getting anywhere with it. What if we actually train the natural helpers on how to recruit families for PCIT? And originally the idea is that we bring them here to the Mailman Center. And then what we'd have them do, because we wanted it to be very targeted, is actually train the natural helpers to reinforce the PCIT principles that are happening at home during weekly home visits. One of the big issues, and we just had a paper accepted related to kind of the PCIT homework, is parents can report to you how much homework we were doing, but we really have no sense of what the quality is. So if we have somebody going into the home once a week, they actually can give you a sense of the quality of the homework. Or they may feel more comfortable telling the natural helper of like, hey, like, this PCIT thing that we're doing, like, I'm not liking it so much. Or, I don't like the bug in the ear. So it allows us to kind of get some feedback and troubleshoot some of those things. So the interprofessional partnership of this is PCIT with Connect Familias, which is a service partnership, which is a pretty different model than what we were used to. So our implementation plan was training the natural helpers on PCIT recruitment. We did this back in 2014. We trained them on strategies to help retain the people that were coming in, and then kind of reinforcing those strategies through those weekly home visits where they would actually code parent-child behavior interactions and then give the parents feedback on that. We didn't expect them to remember everything, so we actually created a tablet resource completely in Spanish. By the way, the whole training for this was in Spanish, which is awesome for me because I speak zero Spanish whatsoever. So making sure I had staff on board to help out with that. Georgina actually helped out with some of those trainings back in the day. So we really wanted to evaluate. There were some things that the natural helpers were like, we don't want to have to talk about this. And with respect to that, we made sure that they had a video resource. We're like, listen, we don't feel comfortable talking about physical discipline, so we actually had someone on our staff kind of have a video testimony, kind of explain the pros and cons of physical discipline and how it might lead to child maltreatment and things of that sort. So we implemented that, and initially, even when they were coming here, we were getting far more people coming here, but our drop rates were still pretty high. So just as of Monday, the thing that we have since changed is we now have a satellite clinic in Little Havana. So we're hoping by having PCIT services within their community, it might reduce transportation barriers to some degree. If there's any stigma associated with coming to a traditional behavioral health provider, since they're already going to Connect Familias for some of their other services or for some of their meetings, that they might be willing to do this. I don't know if that'll actually work. We'll find out, and that's what we're evaluating right now. All right, one last one, and then we'll switch to the man of the hour, Dr. Comer, is primary care PCIT. So within our Healthy Steps practice that I was talking about a little bit ago, some of the families with young children, so again, it serves the 0 to 3 range, Healthy Steps, one of their jobs is to link people to services. And, you know, they would try and link them to parenting service, but parents are just kind of unwilling to do it. Whether it was because they didn't have childcare, it was too far away, they didn't feel like they needed formalized classes, maybe they reported some behaviors, but not something that might require like a 10-session treatment. Or we have parents that, like, you know, we're observing their interaction with the child, but they're not getting it, that there's any concern, and more of a permissive parenting style that have no insight that maybe they could benefit from some additional support. So our proposed solution was, is to have the Healthy Steps specialists actually recruit Healthy Steps families to receive brief group-based PCIT. So instead of our normal PCIT, which is mastery-based, that can last anywhere from like 12 to like 30 sessions, this was just a brief kind of 4 sessions where they get a teach session of here's the positive relationship skills, and then they get a session within a group with their kids where they each take turns getting coached. And it's about an hour-and-a-half session. Lasts 4 weeks, and then they get the discipline phase didactic, and then they get 1 session where they're practicing implementing that as well. So within this one, we have PCIT partnering with Healthy Steps, which is a development specialist, and Healthy Steps is already partnering within the pediatric practices. So again, as of last fall, they've been recruiting families based on the assessment measures that they already use in practice. So we use measures of parenting stress, parenting behaviors, and based on those scores, looking for a targeted audience that might benefit from some additional services. And then the other point is the Healthy Steps specialists at that given practice, whenever there's a primary care PCIT going on, they go to that practice. So there's a warm handoff. So the person that I know, that I trust, that I have a working relationship, they are also there with me during this intervention time, which we think is what's helped with us having good retention rate overall with this. This is also the first time that primary care PCIT, to our knowledge, is being implemented in Spanish, so we're increasing access for a new population. And then the other thing that we thought is, okay, so even for those families that they don't think that they need intense services, we wanted to make sure that, well, maybe if they won't take intense services, even though we don't think primary care PCIT is enough, maybe if they have a sampling of those 4 sessions and there's still a need and we're giving them behavior rating measures to get a sense of what that is maybe they'll be more open to traditional behavioral health PCIT after completing primary care PCIT. All right, so again, just kind of framing this back, and this we can go back to at the end, is just thinking about interprofessional ways that we can promote access to behavioral health care. And what we've been doing is really trying to develop and evaluate some of those. Here's the deal: is this guy just like kills it on the early career awards. He's gotten so many from the APA, from Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Foundation, Anxiety Disorder Association of America, the Mental Health Initiative, Charles H. Hood Foundation. He's gotten tons of early career awards from APA, from ABCT, as well as he was named one of 2013's Rising Stars by the Association for Psychological Science. On top of all of this, he has over 60, maybe more, but by my count at least, there was at least 60. How many are you up to in terms of peer-reviewed pubs? He lost count, they're so high. And even
one award I have not received is being on Time Award.
Okay. Okay. So
work on
even
that for
after
next year.
doing all of this stuff, he still finds time to sleep, which I think is amazing that he's so productive. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Comer.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind of introduction, and I apologize for my delay. I wish I could say that, well, as a cognitive behavioral therapist, I'm going to reframe this was an experiential enactment of the reason we need remote treatments and barriers to services are an issue. So Dr. Gent really seems like has talked about a lot of the issues in problems in the accessibility of quality children's mental health care. I'm just going to acknowledge some of my funding, and all of these people are in the DNA of the work that I'm going to present today. So broadly speaking, my work seeks to improve the quality, the accessibility, and the acceptability of supported interventions for kids, and my specific focus is on early onset disorders and the role of technology for overcoming traditional barriers to care. Today I'm going to talk about the promise and potential of technology, and specifically the example of some of the work we're focusing on, which is internet-delivered parent-child interaction therapy. So we call it PCIT. And I won't go too much into this because I think all of you are very aware that we have very effective treatments, but there's a large gap between affected individuals and actual services. So sometimes when I give talks, I go through all these stats of there's this proportion of kids don't have access to care, and there's these many great treatments out there. But I think with this audience, I'm just going to present this. We have lots of great treatments, and we're not reaching the people who need them. Treatments can work, but we're sort of the proverbial tree falling in the woods with no one there to hear it. We're not making any noise with our evidence-based treatments. This is due to inadequate numbers of professionals, largely in rural but other remote areas, geographic disparities in mental health care. A large proportion of U.S. counties have no psychologists, psychiatrists, or social workers that focus on child mental health problems, long wait lists, and large number of families report that they have no way to get to our services. Further obstacles, transportation, and also the stigma related to going to a mental health clinic or a psychiatry clinic or a clinic that specializes in developmental problems. And then of the lucky ones that actually make it to treatment, they're rarely receiving quality care. They're rarely receiving evidence-based treatments. And even when they are receiving evidence-based treatments, those programs are rarely implemented with integrity, particularly when they're delivered in overburdened settings with understaffed facilities and high turnover. I'm going to skip through this, but a lot of my work is focused on rising rates of off-label prescribing to treat child behavior problems. We're seeing rising rates of polypharmacy and rising rates of antipsychotic medications for aggression and for anxiety disorders. And a large part of this is that in primary care settings, sometimes we don't have the providers don't have the training or certainly the time to adequately attend to children's mental health needs from an evidence-based perspective, and so they're left with limited tools to address child problems. So for decades, the issue has been, what if we just don't change anything at all and something magical just happens? But fortunately, in recent years, we've seen this enormous transformation in the role of technology in our lives in every aspect, changing how we work, communicate, relate, and how people are receiving services. Just to give sort of a context to the sort of mass media landscape, right now, I think it's about 78% in the United States of households have internet access. And we're seeing the platforms, the type of platforms that are having people connect to the internet are getting increasingly more remote and mobile. It was, I don't know the age of people in the room. I remember when it was an amazing thing that people had computers in their house. Then they had desktop computers, laptops. Now we all have computers in our pockets, some on our wrists. They're going to be wearable computers on the horizon. This is a picture of my daughter. We were at an airport, and she picked this up and said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's a phone." And she said, "Where does it play the movies?" So, so even the old technology is rapidly changing. And then we're going to go backwards a couple more years. This is that same girl playing on my laptop, which is probably also why that one broke. But so younger and younger generations are increasingly using technology. When we break down that 78%, if you look at the top, who's online? 78% of U.S. households are online. Of course, there's a couple of important digital divides. One is with regard to age, but the encouraging thing is when you look at below 50, almost 90% are online, and so those without internet access are sort of aging out. And when we think about families with young children, it looks like the vast majority are online. And the other digital divide, of course, is with regard to household income, which is a major obstacle right now. Still, 63% of families who are making less than $30,000 a year are online. So that's promising, and there's considerable initiatives nationally to address that digital divide with regard to income. And it's estimated that within the next decade, household internet will have the same ubiquity that we've seen other technologies, regardless of income or geography. So what are people doing online that they acknowledge? The third most common is looking for health and medical info. So the internet is already a place where people are going for their medical information, their health information, for better or for worse, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in this room would say, get them off the internet, they're filled with crazy ideas. But this is where they're going before they even talk to you guys. So the promise and potential of technology is that technological innovations can offer transformational opportunities to overcome traditional barriers to care and transcend geographic disparities in mental health care. That's the hope. And as Dr. Jen mentioned, right now, there's a lot of research efforts to see how much we can fulfill that promise. Right now, my lab is working on a meta-analysis looking at what does research say about the role of remote technologies for expanding the reach of mental health care. So through a bunch of search criteria, I won't bore you with the specific details, but we found that there are 390 studies in peer-reviewed journals now that have looked at technology and its role for remotely delivering treatment. And we see that since around 2005 is when there's just been this enormous spike. So we're seeing a striking uptick in research efforts and activities, and I'm sure if we looked at funding as well, we'd see a similar spike. But then with regard to children's mental health, this slide sort of breaks it down. Blue is studies on adult populations, and yellow is studies on child populations. We're not seeing nearly the uptick. We're seeing a bit of an uptick, but it's not nearly the uptick. 74 child studies so far. These are trials looking at pre versus post outcomes. And when we look at the quality of these studies, so let's just look at those 74 child studies. The good news is that the vast majority, 85% of these studies, are using randomized designs. That's terrific because single subject open trials really can't rule out even whether the passage of time is making things better. But the bad news is, if you look at these randomized designs, 3/4 of these randomized studies are using inactive comparisons, waitlist comparisons, or bibliotherapy, not intended to by itself be a fully active treatment. So that's one area that we really as a field want to get better at. When we think about the benefits and the challenges of internet delivered treatment, of course, we're increasing access. We're reaching more rural families, remote families, other underserved communities. A big thing is we're treating kids in their natural settings. We can work with them in schools. We can work with them in home settings, rather than having them come into an arbitrary setting that they've never been to before and never will again, and say, okay, let's teach you how to work with your kid here. having families work in their own home in the settings that are causing the most problems. There's research on the cost effectiveness of internet-delivered treatments. We talked about stigma. Treating families in their home. A family may not want to go to a appointment at a building that says, mental health clinic, but they may be comfortable if that clinic were in their own living room. Reduce travel. Of course, I illustrated the burdens of travel this morning. Continuity of care. Families that relocate. A lot of my early work in this was working with military families who were restationed, and we were able to provide continuity of care regardless of their move. Challenges, of course, maintaining confidentiality. Every day we learn about large data breaches that have to do with the internet. Clinical risk management. A family, some families may not be appropriate for home delivered care or to be treated in quote-unquote unsupervised settings. Tech literacy needs. Families may not know how to use the equipment. Therapists, as I've come to learn, may not know how to use the equipment. The digital divides we talked about with regard to age and income. Cultural competency issues. When we're reaching more people, we're also reaching new populations that weren't coming into our doors, so this is going to raise issues of cultural competency. And state regulations as well. Just because we can have a video conference with someone doesn't mean that we can ethically practice with everyone we can reach. So we can talk more about those if people have questions. Telemedicine is sort of a broad term used to refer to the use of electronic media to facilitate real-time interactions for the provision of care usually delivered in person. So here we're distinguishing it from the broader term of e-health, which can include self-administered programs, internet-delivered bibliotherapy, things like that. So with telemedicine, we're talking about real-time interactions. Sometimes with regard to mental health, it's called behavioral telehealth, telemental health, telepsychiatry. Field doesn't know what to call it. They call it like 3 or 4 different names that all are referring to the same thing. And the promises and potential of technology. It's important that we don't just say, what can we do in the clinic? Can we replicate it in a remote treatment manner? Because we're going to run into a lot of, well, we're just watering treatment down. Technology is so advanced now that we need to be asking ourselves, what new does technology allow us to do? Not just can we do it, but maybe in a watered-down format over the web. So the first wave of technology-based research, this is from that meta-analysis I was talking about, is can we replicate what works in the clinic? The second wave was what new can we do with technology? And then the third wave, which is sort of the wave I think we're in now, is asking questions, is it even possible to replicate what can be done with technology in the clinic? With GPS, with all sorts of, in situ opportunities. Is it possible that in some ways, some of the things we can now do with technology would surpass what we could ever have done in the clinic? So an example I'll illustrate today from my work is internet-delivered parent-child interaction therapy, or IPCIT. I think this room is pretty well aware of PCIT, and it sounds like it refers to PCIT services. PCIT is one of the standard behavioral parent training programs associated with substantial treatment effects. There's a whole family of parent training programs that are all very similar, and they're all focused on first building a more positive relationship between the parents and the child, and then after that, building on that and working on effective discipline and consequences and follow-through. One of the things that distinguishes PCIT is that the therapist is removed from the family. So the therapist is located in a room, traditionally an adjacent room, behind a one-way mirror. So the therapist is providing live eyes and input on the situation, but they're not in the room with the family. So it's a more naturalistic experience for the family. So I don't know if you can see in this picture, the therapist is behind a one-way mirror. The parent is with the child. The parent has a earpiece in his ear, and the child can't hear the live coaching that's happening from the therapist. So we're providing live coaching in the moment, and we're not out parenting the parent by being in the room. And programs where the therapist is the tough guy, and then as soon as the therapist is gone, everything changes and the parents are have been out parented. So with PCIT, we're trying as much as possible for ecological validity, as naturalistic a parent-child interaction as possible with live coaching for the parents. At this age, kids are too young to engage in direct cognitive therapy. You're not going to work with kids and say, what was going through your mind when you hit your sister? What was going through your mind when you broke the window? Can you think of your coping thoughts? They just don't have the cognitive capacities to engage in that type of treatment. So instead of directly targeting kids, we indirectly target kids by directly reshaping the primary context of child development, which is parent-child interactions. So this is standard PCIT, and this is what decades of research has been, through randomized trials and other clinical evaluations, documented that if you get quality PCIT, the majority of kids showed excellent treatment response. But that's the people who get quality PCIT. That's the people who are lucky enough to walk into the door and happen to realize that their local community provider is Dr. Jen's program, or these programs are very scattered across the country. So in our work, what we've been building is internet-delivered PCIT. I will say in this picture, I want to point out that this kid was tantruming on the ground. The mom did not take the kid down. Sometimes audiences get confused and think that we're teaching parents how to do wrestling maneuvers. This kid was already down. So, but what we're doing is we're doing internet-delivered PCIT, just like a lot of the other benefits that we've talked about with expanding the reach of care. PCIT providers are few and far between. The program here trains providers in PCIT, but this is Miami's very lucky for that, but most regions don't have that. So with internet-delivered PCIT, we can expand the reach of expert providers, extend the availability of PCIT services, overcome geographic barriers to care, and addressing regional workforce shortages in mental health care. We can reach families dwelling in rural or impoverished regions. We can reach, one of our new efforts, we're trying to reach families in the Keys, that it's so hard for them to get to quality care. And we're also hoping that we can expand the ecological validity of treatment by treating kids in their natural settings, by treating kids in their homes where their families are running into the most struggles. And perhaps we can overcome stigma-related barriers. So every treatment right now is trying to say, okay, well, maybe we could do this on the internet. PCIT, I think, is particularly amenable to a video conferencing format because decades ago, before there even was an internet, the therapist was separated from the family. So way back when, the whole idea was that the therapist should not be in the same room as the family. So instead of being behind a one-way mirror, we do it over the internet where the therapist is watching with live eyes and ears. So we have, the family has a web camera on themselves. Mom and dad have Bluetooth earpieces. The therapists are providing live coaching in the moment with families coaching them in their own homes. Here's a screenshot of what one of our sessions might look like. So instead of being behind the one-way mirror, the therapist is in our office at FIU. The family is in their own home. You can't see because of the hair, but the mom has a earpiece in, and the therapist is providing live coaching. Here's another screenshot. Here's where we do like therapy teams. So we'll have two therapists in the lower right. Let's see. Talking about a little bit of, I was going to show videos, but I think with time, maybe I'll skip through them. And if people want to watch videos afterwards, I'd be happy to show some, but I know we're running out of time. PCIT, internet PCIT hardware and equipment, it's really not that complicated. We've worked hard to not do a high-end technology setup for this because we want this to really have as much reach as possible. A lot of telemedicine programs will provide, they'll connect with T1 lines where, very expensive, secure sort of point-to-point lines from maybe the clinic here to a pediatric office out in some rural community. But then everyone has to get to that pediatrician's office. So by treating families all in their home, we can't do that point-to-point connection. We have to go over the internet. So all that's needed is a computing device in the therapist's office and the treatment family's home, high-speed internet connectivity at both sites, webcam, microphone, and speaker at both sites to capture and deliver the audio, and then the wireless earpiece, typically a Bluetooth, that pairs with a computer or tablet. Some families, especially if they have unlimited minutes, will do the bug in the ear coaching through their phone. It can be a Bluetooth to the phone, or if that's too expensive, they can do the cord to their phone. And we can find different ways to have live feed to the family to figure out what would be the most affordable option. The therapist office, this is actually true of all telemedicine. The light source should preferably be positioned behind the web camera, sort of like a vanity mirror. You don't want overhead lighting. The family's treatment rooms, you want rooms with doors that can be closed, gated hallways. You want to remove all non-PCIT friendly toys, breakable or dangerous. In the pictures I showed you, we didn't do that. We've had some TVs broken, we've had some windows broken, but in all of those cases, the families have never gotten too upset with us because that's the kid they actually enjoy it. So you see how hard it is to live with this kid. So better their house than our office, I guess. But you know, this is the population, kids with serious conduct problems, and so it makes sense that we'd see things getting broken. Without getting into too much of the specifics of PCIT, there's a need for a timeout chair. You want to make sure that timeout chair is an easy view of the camera, more than arm's length from any other items in the room. Timeout room, you need to make sure there's no dangerous or reinforcing items. Timeout room is a bit of an interesting thing because I don't know how the setup is here, but in sort of classic PCIT, the one-way mirror can see the family and can also see into the timeout room. Can you see into the timeout room?
We use a swoop and go, so that's.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, when you're doing a single camera at home, for those of you who do PCIT, you can imagine how anxiety-provoking it can be if that was interesting. How anxiety-provoking it could be if the timeout's happening off camera. Most video conferencing platforms have screen sharing functions, and so we use this to provide skills feedback. So in PCIT, you're collecting data for homework assignments for the family every week to look at how much they're doing special playtime at home. You're also coding them every week, how much you're doing, labeled phrases, behavioral descriptions, reflections, how much you're avoiding criticism and commands and questions and things like that. So we chart them each week, and so we have an evolving Excel spreadsheet that has a chart. And so we just click this share screen, we bring this up, and the family can look at their progress within session. I talked about selecting a video conferencing format. T1 and T3 lines, the ones we were talking about, are the super expensive, highest quality, most secure, but too costly for in-home use. You're not going to have a T1 line for 1,000 people's homes. Then there's small and large business web conferencing appliances. You've seen WebEx, GoToMeetings. These are not so expensive, and they generally have a pretty high level of encryption and are not too costly. The family doesn't need an account themselves. They can just be invited. Personal appliances like Skype, they're free, but they're frequently disrupted, drop connections, and there have been a lot of concerns about privacy and security. When you're using Gmail and I can't wait to get home and just crash on the couch, and then all of a sudden there's an ad for a couch on the side. Well, people wonder about Skype too. Anything that's free, sometimes people say you're probably the commodity. So that's something to think about. So in general, in telehealth, people say stay away from Skype. Skype for business is sort of different and might be okay. Providers, of course, have to comply with HIPAA, and that's an important consideration when selecting video conferencing platforms. Just some articles I've written on things you want to make sure when selecting a video conferencing platform. You want to make sure there's certain encryption standards. You want to make sure that it allows users to host unlisted meetings so that you don't have someone just browsing what are the available meetings and, oh, I'd like to join that meeting, and then all of a sudden you have an uninvited guest in your therapy session. Require that the users be invited by the host, the therapist, in order to attend. All meeting attendees have to log on with an email address and a strong password. Identification of every meeting attendee. Very important, you have to make sure that no information is stored on the network after the session. Some video conferencing platforms don't guarantee that, and so you have to stay away from those in order to comply with HIPAA. You need to make sure that the video conferencing platform assures in their literature that no information is stored on the network after the session. So there are trade-offs when we're doing internet-delivered PCIT, and this, by the way, applies to any home-based telemedicine format. Greater obstacles. We get siblings walking into the room. We get phone calls. We get people ringing the doorbell. We get the kid leaving the room, things that you don't get as much, hopefully, at clinic-based treatment. But it also creates opportunities to practice in real-world settings. In traditional PCIT, they come into this sterile clinic environment where nothing can happen. No one's gonna, there's no siblings gonna come in and we teach them, and then we say, now go try it at home. And the family comes back a week later, said, oh, I couldn't do it because of this or this or this. And you say, oh, you're not doing it right. And so then you try to coach them in this perfect sterile environment, and they say, okay, and then they go home and they can't do it again, and then they come back and like, oh, this family just doesn't get it. Well, so we're actually in the home, and it turns out like the treatment doesn't get it. It's really complicated to do a lot of these skills in real world settings. So it creates more opportunities for real world practice of the skills. Fewer opportunities for therapist-child interaction. A lot of times in traditional PCIT, the therapist is modeling skills with the kid at the beginning and end of sessions, so you don't have that obviously with the internet-delivered format. The web conferencing equipment can be an enticing distraction for some kids. Some kids don't notice it at all, and that's actually interesting. And actually, we like it when the kids can completely forget about it. It's actually easier to forget this than it is to forget the one-way mirror in clinic-based PCIT. But then other kids start playing with the camera, they want to see themselves. So we do all sorts of things where we sometimes make it so that their screen isn't even on, so that the kid can't see himself, things like that. We'll turn off our video feed so the family can't see us. And you can also implement house rules for grabbing equipment. Childcare can be more or less difficult. We have clinics where we have lots of assistants that help, and so we actually have a team of undergraduates who are our childcare people that when families come in, they watch the siblings. But at home, you have siblings running around. We've had more sessions where siblings are there. We've had sessions where kids and the siblings are in their pajamas. We've had kids just start getting naked in session. Stuff that doesn't happen as much, hopefully, in clinic-based treatment. So the good news is it's real, and we're helping parents practice the skills in their real environments, but it is clunkier sometimes. Some important issues as we discuss licensure and jurisdiction. In psychology licensure, it's state-based, and you need to be licensed in the state you're providing treatment to. For instance, I'm licensed in Massachusetts because I used to live in Massachusetts, and so I can do internet-delivered PCIT with a family in Massachusetts. But if a family in Rhode Island called, I'm not licensed to practice in Rhode Island. So just because we now have the ability to reach more families doesn't mean that we're authorized to. And there's minimal but growing consensus guidelines for the appropriate conduct of technology-assisted treatment. Basically, every article you read, and I've written a bunch of these, just end with proceed with caution, which is a very dissatisfying guideline. So I think we're coming to more consensus, but it's an issue. High-risk families, maltreating families. Sometimes we might want to think that they may not be appropriate for internet-delivered PCIT. If I'm 7 hours away from the family and I see maltreatment happening on camera, what is my, what's the safety plan? When we provide remote treatment to families, we always make sure we have their pediatrician. The family gives us an emergency contact number. There's a contract that if we lose the feed or if we're concerned about maltreatment, that we will contact your pediatrician. So and of course, if we see anything, then of course there's reporting requirements. But it's definitely in some ways, in many ways, riskier than providing treatment in supervised settings. Billing is an issue. Actually, federal and state payers are more progressive with regard to reimbursing for telehealth services than private insurers. So Medicaid, Medicare, the VA, DOD, those all have very good and expanding coverage for remote treatment. Every state differs, though, in terms of jurisdiction. So some states require that you have to have a documented barrier to care. So you have to document that the family lives in a professionally underserved workforce region. Some will say not only do you need that, but you also need to say that they don't have treatment for that specific problem that the child has. And of course, there are large forces that are working to make sure that things aren't reimbursable. So that's definitely
So I have a question about super far away
yeah.
cases. So to enter into that contract, all that stuff, is there one-time visit face-to-face? Or is all this done over the internet?
Yeah, so so in my work so I've done both scenarios, and I think out in practice people are doing both scenarios. We have a couple of large research studies. One study randomly is assigning people to either internet-delivered treatment or clinic-based PCIT, and for that, the independent evaluators need to not know whether someone's getting home treatment or remote treatment. So we do all the assessments in person, so so that the evaluator is blind to whether they're in that. So in that scenario, they come in, they consent to treatment in person and all that. In another study, which we're just starting up, everything's remote, and so we, through video conferencing, discuss the study with them. They have a consent form they can print out and mail to us. So, and in the field, I mean, I think a lot of people who are doing telehealth in private practice are doing it 100% telehealth without ever shaking the person's hand. But there's both, and there's no requirement that you have to have met the person in person first. Another obstacle is technological literacy, not just among the families, but you know, it's something I've come to learn among the therapists. You know, my therapists are all in their 20s, early 30s, and I expected that they were going to be teaching me about treatment, about technology, and you know, even people that seem to be more tech savvy, clunky things happen, calls get dropped, buttons are confusing. And that's something to consider as well. I'm going to skip the clips of internet PCIT, but I'm happy to share them with anyone if you'd like to stay afterwards or talk later. Right now, we're finishing up my RCT looking at internet-delivered PCIT versus clinic-based PCIT. We've finished treatment, and we're just finishing the 6-month follow-up evaluations. Hopefully, those data will be out soon. Since you know, we're not sure exactly what we're specifically looking for. We'd love to, I mean, don't tell Sheila Iberg, we'd love to beat clinic PCIT with internet PCIT. Obviously, standard PCIT is a really wonderful, amazing treatment, so that probably isn't the case. But so what's a success? So if you have comparable outcomes, then you know the internet-delivered PCIT has more reach. If you have 75% of the outcomes, let's say it's significantly less favorable than standard PCIT, well, 75% of the outcomes versus nothing for a family that has no access to quality PCIT, and then maybe 50% is good, maybe 30%, I don't know. So we'll see what the outcomes come, and then we'll say that's good. But you know, so it's an interesting question, right? So like we're always comparing things, or we want to compare things to this unicorn that doesn't exist in many places. You know, quality, evidence-based treatment practice with treatment integrity. So we're excited. That studies 3 to 5-year-olds with disruptive behavior disorders. Right now, with my colleague Dan Bagner and collaborating with Michelle Berkowitz, we're excited. We're just starting actually. 2 days ago was our first recruitment day. This is a study funded by NICHD, And we're looking at kids with behavioral problems and developmental delay. So kids exiting out of early intervention programs where they've been receiving home-based services, and all of a sudden they're no longer eligible due to age. And we're seeing whether internet-delivered PCIT can be a nice bridge for kids who are aging out of early steps here and one of the other early steps sites. So that study is comparing internet PCIT versus referrals as usual. Of course, one of the referrals as usual for these families will be the PCIT program here. So that's that study. Future directions. I think it's really important to consider evaluating sequences of treatment. A lot of the exciting programs that Dr. Gent was bringing up. Not every family needs a full course of internet PCIT, and maybe there's self-administered formats that might be a good start in sort of a sequenced step care model, and families that aren't adequately responding then get real-time PCIT or internet PCIT. So I think considering internet PCIT in the context of sequences of treatment is probably a more realistic way to think about things. Internet PCIT for new populations. I just got a grant to look at internet PCIT for early anxiety disorders. That's an exciting project coming up. Also thinking about routine therapists, generalists, clinicians. Everything I do is sort of on this front is about bypassing local providers and sort of suggesting that in many ways a lot of regions the local workforce doesn't have quality training in PCIT or other evidence-based treatments, and so we can remotely from Miami or where I used to be in Boston remotely treat families, but it really doesn't solve one of the fundamental problems in mental health care, which is the person power. And so we want to be thinking more in terms of there's only so many quote unquote experts in evidence-based treatment, and can we have more frontline providers implementing internet-delivered PCIT, or is it just another specialty program that's not going to have reach? And then, of course, considering group-based PCIT as well, because the one-to-one person power issue isn't solved by internet PCIT. Some concluding thoughts, as with all those frustrating papers I was saying. We want to be cautiously optimistic. We want to proceed with caution. Another issue for anyone working with technology is that technology is rapidly changing and the field needs to stay agile. We need to make sure, so about a decade ago, NIMH and NICHD put a ton of money, just millions and millions of dollars, into developing amazing self-administered programs on CD-ROMs. And they were great programs, and they're glossy, and they're wonderful, and they did randomized trials, and kids got better, and people like them. And now you buy any computer or any tablet, any computing device, rarely has a CD-ROM drive. And all these programs were grant funded, so they're sort of dead now. They don't have the funding to then say, okay, now let's get it online or things like that. So we need to stay agile. We need to be working with industry who knows what in 10 years is going to happen and that everything's going to be wearable or everything, So whatever it is, in order to stay ahead of things and not get aged out with our work. Beware, a lot of bells and whistles out there. If you go to the app, another study my lab's doing is we're evaluating the quality of mental health apps and how, so a lot of the research is top down, so where people do technology-based program, do a randomized trial, but what's on the consumer marketplace, and does that reflect evidence-based recommendations? And we're finding it's really scary out there. So be careful. A lot of your patients will probably say, I got this great app, and then you look at it, the classic thing is it's for parents with disruptive, with kids who have behavior problems, and then out of curiosity, I'll download it, I'll look at it, and it's like a coloring app, and it like has all this, self-reported quackery of, well, the coloring makes the parent, distracts the parent, and they ignore it. It's interesting, but there's no, it's just made up. So, but their programs are so much more user-friendly and interesting than most of the research-based apps that are done, which are so text-heavy and non-inviting and non-appealing in ways that they're not going to get used either. So we really need to be collaborating with industry, and industry really wants to build on this front. And then finally, just one more cartoon. We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So, you know, I'm really interested in internet-delivered PCIT, but there are a lot of other ways that we can be reaching families. Dr. Jen certainly has lots of exciting projects on that front, reaching families in pediatric and primary care settings, the iBook program, and thinking about, you know, we need to have a portfolio of options, and technology can be a big part of that, but we can't think, you know, the sort of horse race model of, is it this or this? You know, there's a lot of things that can work, and there's even more things that can't work. So we need to think, what is the portfolio of things that can work, and stay agile and think of different ways to reach families and deliver evidence-based treatment to a larger proportion of the population in need. So I'll stop there. I've run over, but if anyone wants to continue the conversation, I'm happy to. I can stay around. I can show clips, but I don't know if anyone also has any questions. I'm happy to answer those as well.
So if anybody wants to see the video clips, just stay and then
Yeah, sure.
Share those, but if you have other questions to go, we totally understand. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just.
She's associated.